Hello and welcome to this month's Kinetiq Health Wellness webinar. I am Andrea Hickle and I am the licensed clinical social worker here on the Kinetiq Health team. And I am excited to be talking to you guys this month about mastering stress for mental clarity and daily excellence, just in time for Stress Awareness Month here in April. So to start out today, we're going to go over some webinar housekeeping. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to use the chat box located in the right-hand side of your webinar screen. For audio access, attendees can use computer audio or call in using the phone options. And after the presentation, slides and resources can be downloaded by clicking the icon on the right-hand side of your webinar screen. So here's the basic of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to go over how stress shows up in our daily lives, both personally and professionally. We're going to talk about how stress impacts our focus and energy throughout the day. We're going to talk about how to recognize and acknowledge personal stress signals. And then we're going to go over just some practical tools to improve mental clarity and some resources on how to build some resiliency with that, as well as some simple habits that you guys can start today after this presentation. So starting out, what is stress really? Like I said, in April, we bring awareness to stress and what that looks like. Stress is something that is a universal term, and it's also something that doesn't discriminate. We all experience stress in a variety of levels. Stress, simply put, is just the body's natural response to demands that are put on it. Something that I always want to note about stress is that stress is not inherently bad. A lot of times when we mention stress, it can be taken as a bad thing. And, there can be many times where stress can be a negative impact for us, both physically and mentally. But in the short term, stress can actually be positive. Can actually help to shift our focus and help to get us to achieve what we're wanting to achieve on the daily basis. When stress becomes chronic, that's when it can become really harmful to our mental health and also our physical health. Stress is one of the most physiological mental health struggles that we can go through. Stress impacts our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, so it really impacts the entire way that we respond and react to things. But a note as we go into this presentation and as we talk about this is that stress is not a personal failure. Like I said, stress is something that we all experience. It's universal, and it's just important that we're able to recognize it and know how to manage it, which that's why we're here today. I want to point out here on the right the stress cycle and what that looks like. So again, the idea of acute stress can actually be a positive thing. So when we look at the top of this stress cycle, when we're in our neutral state, so our body's in a neutral state, we're feeling comfortable, calm. You go down the stress cycle into that beginning of the stress cycle. That's when a threat is perceived. So essentially, that's when we start to notice those demands put on us. Whatever that may look like. And again, stress is very individualized and people's tolerance to stress is completely different. But that beginning stage is when we start to notice that quote unquote threat. The middle stage is when we start to go into that fight or flight response. And this is where we can really use it as a benefit of being more productive, being able to really push ourselves to achieve greatness within whether it be work or home life. We really can take stressors and use that as a way to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Then the end of the cycle is when that's achieved. That quote unquote threat is over, and now your body is able to go back to feeling safe. You're able to be regulated again, right? And so this is an example of the stress cycle and what it can look like in a healthy way when it's acute. So again, an example of an acute stressor, right? Maybe you have a deadline at work for a stressful project, and you really have to focus in the next week and a half on getting the stuff done for this project, this event, whatever it may be. So the beginning state of that is that you are assigned this. You know that this is happening. It's a lot of pressure on you. The middle state is that fight or flight, and you start to say, okay, I'm going to take on this challenge and I'm going to really run with it. I'm going to put my head down and focus. And then in the week and a half, the project, the presentation, the event, whatever it may be, it's complete. You're able to then regulate and go back to that neutral state. When stress can become an issue is when the stress cycle doesn't end. So chronic stress, when there's no end, it's not an acute stressor, it's a long-term stressor. And so a lot of times we see that in more long-term environmental stresses, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So when we look at work, when you are having, whether it be chronic or even acute stress, here's what it might look like or how it might show up for you within your workspace. You might find that you have difficulty concentrating, maybe you have lower energy, or you start to feel more burnt out. You're not as passionate about what you're doing, you're not finding the drive there. I know for me, this next one is big. Feeling a lot of stress, you can become more irritable or reactive. Like I said, that's a huge one for me. When I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, I'm often more irritable, easy to snap. You might have trouble prioritizing. Sometimes when we're dealing with a lot, we become so overwhelmed that we just kind of let go of everything. We can't really even focus on one thing or prioritize because it's just too much. And then, like I said, stress is very physiological. So you will experience maybe some of those physical symptoms: headaches, tension, having sleep issues, stomach issues. There's a lot that can go into what stress can look like physically for you as well. And another note that I'll say, going back to the physical piece, is that chronic stress has been proven to lower our immune system. So you also might notice that you become sick more often. So that's another thing to look out for. Next, we're going to talk about the stress performance curve. So as I said, acute stress is actually a positive thing in many ways, especially in the workplace. It can help to drive us towards that deadline, that event, that project, whatever it may be. When we have too little stress, that's typically a negative thing and can cause low motivation. So if you think about any of those maybe stereotypical characters that you might see in media of being very like cool and lackadaisical and no care in the world, right? Often they're not seen as go-getters or productive or getting things done that they need to get done because they're on the opposite spectrum, of this stress level curve. There is an optimal stress peak performance of where you really want to see your stress levels so that you can perform to the best of your ability. And then, as we said, too much stress leads to that opposite end of feeling overwhelmed and then creating errors within the work that you do and also having those negative physical and mental reactions. So again, looking at the stress curve here, we want to stay within that yellow, the optimal stress. Again, and it might depend on the environment you're in or what's going on. Maybe when you are just at home with family and friends, you want to be in that laid back level of stress, right? That's totally fine. Not having motivation to do things, just wanting to hang out. That is okay in certain circumstances, right? But when we're looking at probably achievement in the workplace, or just productivity in general, we most of the time want to lean within that yellow, that optimal stress. Um, and when it can become dangerous is obviously when we lead into that orange and red. Orange is where you're having more of that chronic stress. And a lot of times, this is where I feel like people are noticing those signs and symptoms of stress. We don't always notice it until we get to that orange level. And then the red is when we experience extreme burnout. And this is when people might need to take time away from work because they've let themselves get to that place where the stress is too overwhelming. So there's definitely an optimal level of stress, as shown here in this stress performance curve. So why does mental clarity matter? Um, Looking at, again, our stress levels and why we want to make sure that we're not getting beyond where we want to be with the optimal stress is because when we get beyond that, we tend to, like we said, have foggy disposition. Our decision making is not as great, and our mental clarity really is impacted. So it's important that we're able to maintain our stress levels so that we can have that mental clarity. And that mental clarity helps us both at work and at home. We have better decision making. We're able to, again, clearly think through things. We don't have that fogginess that we might exhibit when we are really stressed in that orange or red level. We experience fewer mistakes. We're able to be more productive. Again, it's proven that when we're in those higher levels of stress, we become overloaded and too overwhelmed with everything that we just shut down altogether, and so our productivity actually significantly decreases. We're able to be stronger communicators, which is huge. We're able to communicate what we need and what we see from others. And when we are not having that mental clarity, we can't even always communicate what we need. And then we're able to have more sustainable energy, which is helping us, again, in that physical and mental realm long term. Now we're going to talk about how you can recognize your own personal stress signals. As I mentioned, a lot of the times people don't even recognize that they are dealing with chronic stress until they are in that orange range within our stress curve, right? And that sometimes can be where we run into more issues, or it might even be beyond the point of getting it back to that safe zone without maybe more intensive intervention. So, one of the first steps to be able to make sure that we're able to intervene at a good space is recognizing our personal stress signals. And like I said, stress is so individualized to the person. Stress looks different for everyone, and everyone's level of stress tolerance is different. And there's a variety of different reasons for that, genetic reasons, environmental reasons. But the most important thing is that you're able to recognize your own stress tolerance levels. And then obviously, we're going to talk about skills that can help us to build on having better stress tolerance if you do have low stress tolerance. But looking at recognizing your personal stress signals, one of the most notable things that people tend to see, which again is why we might not notice it until later, because we often can push aside mental symptoms, but physical symptoms, they really start to add up for us. So you might, like I said, notice that tension, and you might carry it in different places. I know for me, stress tends to carry in my neck, in my upper back, in my shoulders. I notice when I'm feeling really stiff and tense that might be that I am feeling more of those stressors. You might be noticing more headaches, And that could also be because maybe when you're stressed, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not hydrating, doing all of that stuff. You might notice more fatigue. You're always tired. Maybe you feel like you're sleeping, but you're still never feeling rested. Like I said, there's also those cognitive signals, and that may look different for everyone, but it definitely can look like brain fog, being more distracted, forgetfulness, um, overthinking, having racing thoughts, not being able to redirect. Um, Again, knowing what those cognitive signals look like for you can be really important. And then there's those emotional signals. So, irritability, feeling more withdrawn, being less patient. Like I said, that's a huge one for me to know that maybe my stress is getting out of hand and I need to dial it back. But these stress signals often show up long before you're even able to label them as stress. So they often are showing up in, like I said, that optimal space on the curve, which can be productive, but it's important to note I'm having these symptoms. Is this acute stress? Is this something that's more environmental or could be long-term stress? And how can I help to regulate myself to get back to that neutral zone within the stress cycle? So now we're going to go over some tools for you guys, some things that can hopefully help to regulate you once you're able to recognize those signs and signals. Maybe you're able to practice saying like, okay, I am feeling a little bit more tense, I'm more irritable. Maybe you're able to recognize this is an acute thing. I just need to come up with some good self-care throughout the next 2 weeks to help regulate myself until I can get back to my neutral state. Maybe it's, I'm going through some long-term or chronic stress. Maybe it's financial stress, whatever it may be. So I need to implement regular ways to bring myself to neutral and regulate so that I don't get to burnout level within this long-term or chronic stress, because sometimes that's unavoidable. So the 60-second reset. This is something that is simply looking at what can be a reset signal for you throughout the day when you notice that your stress levels are being heightened, and it can look like a variety of different things. The first step within it is to recognize that you're having those heightened feelings, symptoms, whatever it may be, and take a pause. Find something that you can do in the moment to regulate you and bring you to a mindfulness, right? So bringing awareness typically to our five senses, and then being able to do something that's fairly unnoticeable. Again, it's short, within 60 seconds, as a signal to say, I'm resetting, I'm regulating into this next moment. So people talk a lot about breathing, and breathing is great, and that's what it could look like. It could look like taking a pause, slowing my breathing, doing pattern breathing, maybe doing some finger breathing, square breathing, or box breathing. It could be progressive muscle relaxation. So clenching my fist, releasing it, clenching my jaw, releasing it. I really like the water bottle reset, typically because a lot of people carry water with them wherever you go. And so you can do this pretty unnoticeable of saying, like, I'm going to pause, I'm going to drink my water, I'm going to notice, how does that feel? What's the temperature of the water? How does that feel going down my throat? What does that look like? And then I'm going to maybe add a breath after, and I'm going to say, this is my signal to reset. So I think that's a nice thing to do as well. And then the final step within whatever you choose to do in that 60-second reset is to say, what is the next right step? So maybe you're feeling really overwhelmed, you do your 60-second reset, and that helps you to get somewhat back to that neutral state and say, let me break it down. What is the next thing to do? Not what is my long list of things to do? what is the next thing that I need to do? Tool number 2, I preach this one to clients, and that is to control the controllables. Um, Often with stress and anxiety, we are focusing on things that are without of our control window, and that's very normal. That's very normal, very natural. But a huge thing to ground yourself is to focus on the controllables within your life. So the exercise with that is to draw 2 circles, an inner circle and an outer circle, and put in what are the things I can control, the tangible tasks, the conversations I can have, how I am communicating, how I am responding, the tasks that I can do. And what are the things I can't control? I can't control others' reactions. I can't control others' actions. I can't control tasks that are not mine to control. So those things we have to let go of. Focusing all of our energy just on what's within that inner circle. And maybe even breaking that down. So just saying, what's one controllable action I can do today? And so I love this as kind of a grounding thing to start your day, having those circles and then asking yourself, what are a couple controllables that I can focus on? And I'm going to put those on my list for today. Tool number 3, energy management. It's not just about time management. It's about how are we managing our energy. As I stated, chronic and long-term stress, even acute stress, can lower our immune system and make us sick more often. It also can drain our energy. Like I said, you might find that I feel like I'm sleeping, but I'm still never feeling rested. Energy is influenced by our sleep, our sleeping habits. What are we doing for our morning routines, our evening routines? How is that presenting? Our nutrition and hydration. I think I mentioned this, but I feel like a big one with stress and the headaches is not getting enough water throughout the day. Our movements, are we taking breaks for ourselves, and are we setting boundaries to help protect our energy? So I think that it's important that we are doing a personal inventory on these energy factors and seeing how we're doing, how we can do better with those, whether it's a daily reset, a weekly reset, and then try to work on within 60 to 90-minute focus blocks, or even less than that if you need to 30-minute focus blocks, and have short resets in between where you can add in things to help with your energy, whether that be a movement break, a hydration break, or just, a break to doodle, to read something, whatever it may be. But building those into your focus blocks can really help with that energy management, as well as taking the personal inventory of how am I doing with these things and what can I do better on, what can I expand on. Tool number 4 is cognitive reframing, and this is great for stress management. It's great for anxiety. It's just great in general. It's really important to be able to learn how to cognitively reframe statements that we might have, internal dialogue. So an example of stress thought may be, I'll never get this done. I've got so much to do. I'm never going to get all of this done. That reframe is looking at what's one small piece I can complete within the next 20 minutes. So shifting from the catastrophic, the larger than life task to actionable items. And that also falls into the tool of the focus on your controllables. Really ground yourself in what are my actionable items and how can I focus on those little things today. I like writing out master lists, whether it be within work or home, of things that need to be done, and then doing daily breakdowns of that. So I'm not going to put everything on my master list. I'm not even going to look at my master list most days, but I am going to pull 1 to 2 things off my master list to get done each day. And then that's breaking it down into that cognitive reframe and those smaller bite-sized pieces. Resiliency is very important within building better distress tolerance. Resiliency is something that is built through consistent small habits. So, like I said, trying to take some of these tools and start adding in small daily habits to see if they can build on one another. Resiliency is built through good support systems. So, who can be your supports in stressful times? And if you're struggling with your support system, how can you build upon a support? How can you find additional resources for yourself, whether that be checking out your company's employee assistance program, looking for an outside therapist or support group, joining clubs or activities you might enjoy to meet people, but making sure that you're building up those supports, whatever that looks like for you. Adding in recovery time. So it's really important that, again, we try to avoid chronic stress if we can, and if we can't, if there's certain things beyond what we can control, that we're building in those resets to try to get back to neutral. But between acute stress, between big projects, big life events, we are adding in recovery time so that we are not going from one stress to the other without that recovery. That's going to build up our resiliency and is going to help with the longevity of how we're able to handle things. Self-compassion. Got to give yourself a break. You've got to give yourself grace with the situation and what you can accomplish and what you can't. And so setting those realistic expectations is really important. Make sure that you know what's within your realm of capability, and that's not a failure. It's just helping to protect yourself. And also knowing that building upon small habits and consistent habits will get you to maybe that place where you want to be, even if that's not where you're at right now. I love this quote: resiliency is built daily, not during a crisis. So again, we don't want to be in that orange and red space trying to implement these tools and habits. We want to be in our green and yellow, and we want to build small steps daily to create that resiliency to help to increase that distress tolerance. Micro habits can make a big difference. Again, building up those small habits help us with that longevity. And so some examples of things that you can do to help with stress reduction and building upon micro habits. 5-minute walks between meetings. I had a coworker who had said that if a meeting got over early, they would take a walk in that remainder time, which I love that strategy. Or if there's a meeting where you're just listening in, can you take a walk or a lap around? That can really help to build up that movement and be a good coping strategy or reset. No meeting lunch break. So taking time for yourself in the middle of the day. I have had a client who would go to their car during lunch and really just kind of close their eyes and take some time for mindfulness or meditation. And that was a protective thing for them to help with that. End of the day priority lists for tomorrow. So really looking at, can I take my daily kind of couple of tasks and wrap that into a preparation for the next day, so that when I walk in the next day, I'm feeling prepared, I'm not feeling overwhelmed, I'm not looking at that giant master list. That's a great habit that you can just tack on to the end of the day. Digital boundaries, so important. Make sure that you aren't accepting work emails, work calls after hours, that you are really sticking to your boundaries around that. And I also think with that, setting boundaries around social media and the media you consume in general to help reduce those stress levels and anxieties around things that we cannot control. And adding in a positive check-in with a colleague. So you can create that as a habit throughout your work week. Is can I identify one positive person to do a check-in with? To just be like, hey, here's how the day is going, here's what I'm accomplishing, or maybe it's here's how I'm feeling. I love creating colleagues or work friends that I can go on walks with and kind of do those check-ins while also incorporating movements. So again, adding in those micro habits for big change. Looking at preventing burnout, so preventing getting to that red stage, which is where we really want to avoid, because that's when we tend to see people having to take time out of work or struggling more severely with their mental health. Those burnout signs typically are that we're more exhausted, we're cynical, we aren't able to really see the passion of what we're doing anymore, we're not as effective in what we're doing. And things that you can do to protect that is, again, having clear boundaries around your roles and responsibilities and your relationships within the workplace, but also in other areas of your life as well. Having conversations about what your workload looks like. If you feel like it's not realistic or doable, excuse me, for where you are at, then have those conversations with your manager. Again, adding in rest and recovery, that's going to be huge for burnout. And then asking for those supports early on. Recognizing it within that yellow stage, if not the yellow, the orange, and going into what can I do to eliminate some of my stressors? What can I do to help reset myself within those stressors back to that neutral? And can I get additional supports within my support system, such as the EAP or an outside therapist? So looking at creating a personal stress plan for you. So I'm hoping that this has been some good food for thought of what do my own personal stress signals look like? Do I have ongoing acute stress, chronic stress? How am I handling that? Am I creating those micro habits and breaks? But your personal stress plan is doing just a little bit more reflection and coming up with a good tangible plan. So what are my top 3 stress triggers? What do I notice causes me to experience those stress symptoms? What's one tool that I can use first? Whether it's one of the tools we discussed today or another tool that you may know of or that's worked for you. What's a boundary that I might need to strengthen? Or maybe a couple boundaries that I need to strengthen? How can I build upon that? And then what does my support system look like? Who's there for me? And if I need to build upon my support system, how can I do that and what does that look like? So I want to challenge everyone to walk away and really jot down these questions and answers and have that as a paper in your desk, at work or at home, a sticky note, a note on your phone. But I'd love for you guys to kind of come up with some of those answers to be able to help create that personal plan for you. Here's what I hope you took away. Stress is normal. Everyone experiences stress. And not only that, stress can be a tool to help us be more productive, but it has to be manageable. Small resets help to protect our focus and energy, so we need to make sure that we're creating room and space for those. Mental clarity and being able to manage stress for mental clarity improves our performance. And resiliency and distress tolerance are built through daily habits. You can start this today, so I'm hoping that you will. I've got a couple of resources that I recommend that might help you within that. So Insight Timer and the Medito app. These are some good mindfulness meditation apps that are free, and they can be really good for not only mindfulness, but just good resets or grounding. You could use these as kind of your own 60-second reset. They've got very small meditations. They've got ones that are specific for work, for your commute into work, before meetings. Great ways to kind of reset your mind. The How We Feel app, that's another free app that can be really helpful for just tracking moods, which can help you with more early detection for stress and what those signals may look like for you. The Known Well is a journaling app. Again, they have some buy up options, but you can use that to kind of track thoughts, what's going on. I love journaling as a tool with personal recognition. And then Atomic Habits. So if you have not read the book Atomic Habits, it really helps to build on how to build on some of those small positive changes for habit stacking and micro habits, and also maybe how to break some unproductive habits. And so that can really help us with stress management as well. And then here is my information. So do not hesitate after this presentation. If you have follow-up questions, if you want to connect or hear more about what I offer on our team, shoot me an email and I would love to connect. And that is it for this month's Kinetiq Health Wellness webinar. We look forward to seeing you back next time. Bye.